Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purpose Tune podcast. My name is Kong Shang, and I'm the host of the Purpose Tune podcast show. The goal of this show is to really create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, inspire you to act, and get you in the right mindset so you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, today's podcast episode's guest is Gene Moran. Gene is an award-winning consultant and lobbyist. His work involves advising clients in the defense and security industry, dramatically improving federal sales outcomes. The results of Gene's work are measured in the billions of dollars. So that's quite impressive. And let's dive into learn more about Gene's strategy and how he became a successful man. Gene, how's it going?
Hey, Kong, how are you? Thank you very much for having me today. Things are going great.
Yeah, I'm so fascinated by your background simply because the other day I was looking through my podcast guests, the people who've been on my show, and you have a unique background, especially in the military. And so I wanted to invite you to the show just to gather your thoughts about what purpose means to you, how does it show up, and how did you get involved in this work of not only finding your purpose, but also intertwining that with your professional life. So I'd like to start off with just you telling us, if you could describe us who you are.
Well, that's a great question. Who am I? As a professional, as you mentioned, I am now a lobbyist, and that hasn't always been the case. You alluded to a military career. So I have served in the United States Navy. I served 24 years and retired as a Navy captain, having had command of a couple of ships and served in 6 different ships and interspersed ship duty with time in Washington, D.C. I spent time as a corporate lobbyist. And then in 2013, I went out on my own as an independent lobbyist. But to get to this point today, certainly took support from a lot of people along the way. And I think a common thread in each of those roles that I've had in my adult life is that they all lead toward support of something beyond me and just a transactional sort of job situation. And I think I've always been drawn to something bigger than me in terms of where fulfillment comes from. But the who I am, I think I would describe myself as somebody who is well disciplined, fairly competitive. I like to set an example. I try to treat people well. My wife and I together have raised a family of 4 adult daughters who are now out in the world and some have started their own families. Some have gone on to get advanced degrees. They're all contributing to the world and to society. And there's great satisfaction from being able to look back at that and see that family success is probably among the most important in my life. There are a lot of ways to measure success, and I can talk about any of them. We initially described me as a lobbyist, and that is what I do, and it is who I am. I don't shy away from that. But to get to the point where I am doing what I do as a solo entrepreneur supporting companies, a lot of things had to fit together, and we can break that down any number of ways. But let me stop there, and I'll let you ask some questions.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing with us just a bit more about your background. Appreciate that. So for those folks who don't know what a lobbyist is, could you describe what is a lobbyist?
Yeah, there's a bit of a misconception in the United States about lobbying and what it means. Lobbying is about educating decision makers in government about pros and cons of certain policies or decisions about programs that need to be made. In the defense world, where I specialize, primarily based on the background from which I came, the government has choices to make and a limited amount of resources to apply to those choices. And so companies have to compete for opportunities to provide either products or services. They're typically trying to align to a government need that has been validated through a requirements process. And it's difficult for people to understand exactly how to align to that government process if you've not been a part of it. And so lobbyists often have government experience, either in Congress, in the executive branch, or perhaps working from a corporate position interacting with government. But lobbyists convey information. It has to be grounded in truth. It has to be presented credibly and in a way that answers to a particular government need. And if you're a company president running a company, you have limited bandwidth to be able to keep up with not only the government process, but some of the nuance that occurs throughout any given year. And so it's often easier to contract for that kind of support, depending on your company's size. And so I help guide companies through that process so that they can put themselves in a better position with their government customer, ideally solving government needs in the best way possible, but also helping those companies generate revenue.
That's fantastic. So I have a master's in public policy, and I understand the important work of a lobbyist, what they're trying to achieve. And I wish more people know the process around lobbying and how laws are being passed or how things are being done in government, just so that we can have a better participation in terms of our democracy. And so what's your take on how we can educate folks like the general public on the systems and processes so that they are more aware of how things are actually being done from an operational standpoint?
It's a great question. So I'm a public policy expert myself. I've completed a master's in public policy along with a master's in government financial management. I'm midway through a PhD in public policy that is focused on corporate access to Congress and how we might better understand why some companies participate and some companies don't participate in lobbying the government. It's a right vested in the First Amendment that many people are just not aware of. I think it was the political philosopher Rousseau who pointed out that for democracy to really work, it requires that the citizenry be informed to the point that they can participate not only in voting on issues that are put in front of them, but helping to shape what are the issues that need to be decided. And I think what we see in recent years is a question about what is the truth, what is factual, and where can I get the quality of information required to be able to make good decisions. And we could argue where that comes from, and some would argue that there is no one truth, that there are multiple truths, and they are the ultimate answer works itself out over time. But what I see is that we have questioned truth to the point that we now seem to question fundamental institutions that are required to sustain democracy. That's a concern, and it should concern everybody. But as you allude to, many people are not aware, are not tuned in to the degree to which the fragility of our democracy is revealing itself. I feel very fortunate that through my family and through my military service, I have had some connection to some of the struggles that took place decades before our time, where international alliances were formed and people put their lives on the line in a very specific way to preserve peace and to fight for democracy. I have and two uncles in my family who are now deceased, but who fought in World War II. That was a national struggle where the entire nation was drawn into the fight, so to speak. Contrast that with what we've experienced just in the 2000s. 20 years of warfare where the nation was not fully engaged. The military participated, but the rest of the nation did not. Those things have to be aligned and understood by a majority in order for democracy to really work. And I think we're finding ourselves deep in a struggle that many just don't understand right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you brought up a really good point about how people are questioning our institution, and that has created a lot of concerns for those leaders or heads of states or people running these institutions. And I think, first of all, I think it's so important to appreciate the systems and processes we have in place that form our democracy, because we do have the best government, I believe, in the world for people to participate and vote and express their concerns and have, in however way that express it is protected by our Constitution. And you compare that to other parts of parts in the world, we definitely have a lot of things, a lot of freedoms that we take for granted. And people don't realize until they've actually traveled a bit and step out and see how the political process is being engaged in other parts of the world, and how dark it can be, for someone to express their own opinions publicly and in being arrested or being killed for doing so. And so I think it's important to be engaged and know what's going on, but at the same time, how do you inspire people to think of engaging in the political process in a way that's actually doing more good than bad for the government? Because there are some cynicals out there that say, like, my vote doesn't matter. I mean, it's being counted against millions of votes out there. Like, why should I show up? Like, how do you respond to an average American who has that kind of mindset?
I've been fortunate that I've visited over 60 countries while on active duty in the Navy and as a corporate professional. One of my Navy jobs was leading senators around the world on some of their fact-finding trips to places where I would never have been able to go strictly through ship travel. That exposed me in a fantastic way to just the globe, the diversity in our globe, or in our world, that most people just don't ever get to experience. It is within reach for many more people to travel. I mean, COVID pandemic aside, But the overwhelming majority of Americans don't travel outside the United States. And as a result, they can't even see that they don't have perspective on the world community. Uh, it's a difficult thing to learn strictly through a book or by watching movies. You actually have to immerse in it. Uh, it's it's no surprise to me why people work so hard to get into this country, legally and illegally, because it is so clearly so much better than other systems that are out there. And I don't have the specific answer or the magic wand for how do we get more of the country engaged. Uh, I have thought previously that some form of service, some civic service in our early adulthood, perhaps as we come out of high school or as we come out of college, where we have to uh, serve the country, not necessarily in the military. There are many non-military programs where people could serve and at least have a chance to see things outside their own world. There are people that never leave their hometown, never leave their home state, never leave their region of the country, and so they just don't know. But if they were forced into service to the country in a bigger way, even for just a 1 year tour doing something, uh, it would change their perspective. And I think perspectives have to be changed in that sort of way. I don't think it's something that you can uh, just wave a wand and expect that people will see your point of view.
Right. And you bring up such a good point about traveling, how that enriches our life experiences. So I had the privilege to study abroad in Venezuela for 3.5 months, lived with the host family, spoke little Spanish, and had to get around by using my Spanish English translation book that I carry with me 24/7 to go anywhere. And it's one thing to travel to different parts of the world and visit for a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and another thing to actually live there for a period of time, simply because it does really give us a more real experience of what it's actually like to be a citizen of that country or you know place. And so I think it's important to expand our horizon. Like, I grew up in a small town out of nowhere in the middle of the farmlands, and the people that were I was considered like 1%, less than 1% of racial minority in my high school, and people treated me like how they would see an Asian person in Hollywood movies, and not knowing that I have a culture, a language that has really shaped me to be the person that I am, and how that is completely different from what Hollywood portrays of us Asian Americans living in the United States. And so I felt like it wasn't a place for me to belong, and being constantly not only harassed and discriminated because of my race. I decided to take the opportunity to educate these folks about my ethnic background and build a bridge between me and them. I wouldn't I wouldn't see it to be a goal to change their mind about Asians or Asian Americans, but at least to give shed some sort of clarity or light into who we are, and that we are that there's different groups within the Asian population. And so, like I was telling you during my initial call before this actual recording, was that my background is Hmong, and Hmong, they are an ethnic group of people who live in the highlands of Laos. And when the Vietnam War broke out, my people had to flee the area. And, my people also helped fought with the CIA. They provided landscape intelligence to the CIA and in U.S. military personnel. And my dad was a veteran of the Vietnam War, and so I'm proud of that. That family background and where I come from, and I think it's great to celebrate that as well as, um, being acculturated into the Western country. And so I think a lot of the folks that I went to high school with are still there in my small town, and they're still doing the same things. And there's not really like a goal that they have to expand their personal growth. And so and I hope that things like this, like doing a podcast, or podcasting can really shape people, encourage them to travel more, to expand their horizon, and to educate themselves on what is actually going on in this world aside from what we're seeing in the mainstream media. And so so I love the fact that you've traveled to 60 plus countries, and you've done, you've witnessed all these cultural experiences in people who don't look like you. And that's pretty amazing. What strategies could you give us for folks who are thinking about expanding their horizon and growing more as a person?
I think the reference to the mainstream media is only a part of the equation. Information has never moved faster at any point in human history. It is moving at incredible speed through all sorts of platforms. Mainstream television media is one, and radio media. But I think what is making our situation worse than better, at least right now, is that we are self-selecting information, either intentionally, so on social media platforms, or through our consumption of web content, or any digital content that we subscribe to. We are self-selecting to the point where either we are confirming our own bias, or an algorithm is figuring out what our bias is in order to put our eyeballs on something that is generating dollars. And it amazes me that more people can't see this for the harm it's doing. I think we are lagging in trying to figure this out. I don't claim to be expert at it, but I do see enough indicators that the very big social media companies have known for a long time that they are in fact encouraging and able to predict certain behaviors and reinforce behaviors, good and bad. So I think part of how do we get out of that and how do we grow ourselves is we have to acknowledge that it's happening. And so that means you have to force yourself to look at content from different sources. If it's cable news, the choices are clear, but you have to force yourself to look at something that may not naturally appeal to you. The following of social media channels, listening to podcasts, reading books, listening to books. There are a lot of ways to feed the brain, but the decision point is ultimately upon the individual. And so unless you want to be forced through a curriculum by some entity, whether it's a school or an institution, we are a country that allows this freedom of choice. So we have to choose to let ourselves get a little uncomfortable by consuming information that may not perfectly align to what we think we believe or think we know, and accept that that might allow us to accept that there really are many, many, many other opinions out there of how things should be and how things could be, and what should our system be producing, or our system of government, so to speak. Um, but that is not a natural behavior. That's something that takes discipline, and it takes an acknowledgement that you're actually contributing to the problem by not forcing yourself to be broader in your thinking. But some people just won't get there. I think we
Do you
see
think
that.
that's because they're lazy? They just don't want to think for themselves, or why is that?
I'd hate to label it as lazy, but I think it's just uninformed. Um, you know, there is a degree of ignorance in any population, and there's a degree of arrogance in any population from those who may be mastering the system and the processes and it's doing quite well financially. There may be some arrogance there. Um, there's room for everybody to learn more. I'd hate to, as I say, tag somebody as lazy, but you do have to make the effort.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing those thoughts. Appreciate it. So as I'm traveling, some of the things I like to set, I guess to set an intention is to have an open mind. Like when I travel, right? Like I, one of the I think the skills that I think has really helped me is if I have an open mind, I'm able to take in more information, and not just information in general, but new information, and participate in either activities or events that I wouldn't typically engage with, and reach out and learn more about people's experiences and their stories. I do have some friends that when they do travel, they believe that they're entitled to be treated as, I don't want to say kings and gods, but when they're in a different country, they expect that people should be speaking English, and that they should, these folks should tailor to their needs. So there's a sense of entitlement there. And I get really frustrated with some of these friends, and what's your thought on that? Like, I know that we have, as a country, have been such an influential nation to many. Not to say that we don't have enemies, but there are people in different parts of the country that admire us because of our influence. And do you believe that we can be proud of that, but at the same time be humble that we come from a country with privilege and freedoms, and we should, when we're traveling, should remind ourselves how grateful we are for having those freedoms and privileges, and to help other people who may not have the same opportunities as us.
Yeah, I think you can only get those perspectives by seeing it in person. That's my opinion.
Mhm.
I've although I've traveled to 60 countries, I primarily speak English. That's a fault. However, it's a challenge that is I find difficult to overcome. Let's just use French or Spanish as an example of when I'm in a country where those languages are spoken. I admire the language, and I find myself wishing that I understood it better. I do think language, it can be learned later in life, but it's best learned early in life. Not too unlike golf, in that anybody who plays golf, if you pick it up later in life, it's just more difficult. But if you are not in a position to practice it regularly, it's a skill that you lose. So you can learn it in school and come away, and when it comes time to use the language in a practical application, you can find yourself struggling and learn that you're not multilingual like you might have hoped. Uh, I think to do it, to learn the second language successfully, you have to have opportunities to reinforce it. And I think our system, our way of life, really makes that kind of difficult. I know there are programs in elementary schools and secondary schools, but if you're not around people who are speaking it, you mentioned going to Venezuela, you were immersed in something. That immersion is part of how you absorb it. There are exceptions, of course. I can name some people who are truly gifted intellects who have an ability to pick up language quickly and speak multiple languages, like not just 2 but 5. That is not a gift that I feel like I have. I wish it were different. But so that only answers the language piece, though. I think the part about being open and being humble, that is a learnable skill that requires good examples. I'm not sure that we've always had good examples in front of us in our leaders, but you need to see it done well, so that you can learn from the example of those that may be older, may just be better traveled. It takes an extraordinary amount of self-discipline, I think, to be open, because it's not our normal tendency. We tend to confirm what we think, as opposed to accepting that, hey, I might not have all the answers, and maybe they do know how to do this better. I think that's something that is a reflection of maturity and just life experience.
Define good leadership. What is it, and how does it how is it being displayed?
I think,
And what are certain characteristics, if that helps?
yeah, I think the best leaders are people who are looking out for some greater good. They recognize a certain amount of responsibility in whatever role they have. Responsibility is something that looks forward and looks out for others. The position may have certain authority associated with it, and so a leader is in a position to look out for others, but they have the authority to make decisions that could affect the good of others. But then they have to perform in a way that allows for accountability. And so responsibility, authority, and accountability are all intertwined, but are critical elements of leadership. And I think it's not too difficult to see examples of people who excel in positional leadership. That is, they become a manager, they become a vice president, an executive vice president, a CEO, and so they have positional authority, but then they fail to properly take responsible actions. You have to be able to do these things together, and positional authority alone is not enough for leadership. People follow good leaders, and good leaders take care of people. We see this in what's being termed the Great Resignation right now, where people are leaving their situation. They're not leaving companies; they're leaving people. They don't like the arrangement they're in, and they probably don't like the people they're working for. So they're finding something else. And the pandemic forced people to look at their situation and come to the recognition that they might not want to do something for the next 20 years.
Mhm.
So I'm trying to weave the three elements of leadership that I have seen over time. Some of these are taught in the military. I see it to varying degrees in the corporate world. Uh, I see it with some limited success in the government space and in the executive branch. But I find that the best leaders know how to weave those three things together: responsibility, authority, and accountability.
Mm. That's great. Thank you for sharing those concept with us. So you brought up a point about how people aren't leaving, companies are leaving people, and they're trying to find something that's better. And I've worked in corporate America for 10 plus years, so I'm working primarily in the HR functions, and I've seen these and have engaged in these conversations about what's employee engagement, how do you increase productivity, and there seems to be a common theme, which is, um, are we creating a culture where people can really express more of who they are in a way that's, of course, respectful of others and show up 100% or at least close to 100%. And there's this concept of, as you probably know, since you've been working with companies in talking about leadership, is diversity, equity, inclusion. And you mentioned about biases and all that stuff, which ties into how do you create a culture that's more inclusive, where people can share different opinions, value each other, and move forward to build the most innovative product, in the market or service or whatnot. And so, um, I wanted to get your take on early when you said that about, you mentioned about biases. I wanted to get your take on how diversity, inclusion, different perspectives play into your work, and then also how that drives innovation for your clients.
I want to give you the best answer I can. I think diversity is a lived experience, and leaders, managers, teammates, coworkers, uh, they have to be uh, they have to be comfortable. They have to know that their culture, corporate culture, allows for this sort of full participation. Uh, I think we're coming out of uh, a phase that might have been decades long, where corporate success required people to fit in a certain way. I flash back to IBM of the 1960s.
Mhm.
They had a very specific corporate culture. You could go to a trade show and see an executive in a dark suit, white shirt, thin tie, tight haircut. Uh, they it was a very clear, uniform, and way to present oneself. Uh, Today, I see it in the tech space in a completely different way, where you almost you have to be in a t-shirt and or a hoodie and and uh, I'll call them tennis shoes, but that may not be the term of the day.
Casual
But
shoes.
well, my people are trying to conform to something different, to be different and be themselves, but they can't recognize that they're actually conforming to just a different corporate culture.
Right.
Uh, so it's not the same thing, but the openness part within a corporate setting it starts at the top. And I mean the very top, the board, the CEO, the COO. They have to be acting in ways that are encouraging uh, diverse inputs, or at least options, such that it's not one way or the highway, or that different possible outcomes aren't being considered. In terms of innovation, uh, the truly energetic companies who are agile and able to maneuver and change their minds and change their positions and adapt to new needs, they have to be willing to accept that there may be things that they don't know about whatever the technology is that they're working on. I'm not a scientist, but I've come to recognize that scientific facts are not completely understood. The physics of the world are not completely understood. Our understanding of what technology can do for us is not completely understood. And you have to be comfortable with the discomfort that comes with maybe only being 60 or 70% sure of something. But that being able to move forward by eliminating that 30% that you know is not right, that might be enough to help a company get to that next big thing. We talk about failing forward, or learning to fail, or accepting failure as part of success. But I think we're only recently starting to loosen up really accepting failure in some corporate cultures. I think in the physical science world, it's I think it's much more well accepted. In traditional corporate, it's not so well accepted. We might talk like it is, but I don't believe we truly give people bonuses for failing. That would be rewarding failure. But you have to be experiencing these failures to really break through. That is an element of leadership, that creating that culture that allows for that sort of thinking that not everything is going to go well. There's risk involved in that. For companies that are public companies where shareholders are involved, there's a fiduciary liability that can come with taking extraordinary risk that puts shareholder investment at risk. So there's a balance there, but I'm using a few different examples, but I think it does come back to how does that leader lead, and how does that leadership team lead and set a cultural tone that allows for these things to happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. And to also welcome people for sharing their opinions who maybe differ from theirs, and understanding that these differences in opinions are part of what drives innovation for the company. To add on to your point too. So of course, the show is about purpose and meaning, and we had a chance to discuss a little bit about it. What does purpose mean to you?
I go back to the feeling and appreciation of working towards something bigger than oneself. I use the word fulfillment a lot in describing that overall sense of satisfaction that is available to people as they balance their work and life commitments. I don't think there's a perfect fulcrum on which work and life are balanced. I think there are ebbs and flows depending on what's happening in your personal life, your family life, your work life, that cause you to make decisions about how time and resources will be applied. But a common issue that I see in the corporate world in general, and this is small, medium, and large companies, is a feeling that fulfillment is not being achieved. I came to recognize it as enough of a universal issue, particularly for people who leave the military and go into corporate. I wrote a book about it. And I wrote the book, Make Your Move, Charting Your Post-Military Career. I wrote it specifically to document my learning that took place as I left the military, went through corporate, and then went out on my own. And I, as I mentioned, recognize that this lack of fulfillment is universal enough that I wanted to try to provide a resource that people could at least turn to and see one person's description of the path that one walks leaving the military and coming into corporate, and hopefully people can see something of themselves in my story and learn from that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for showing us that, it takes a lot of elements and components to achieving the kinds of outcomes we want for our lives. Going back to your earlier point about how you've had a lot of people to help you, and no man is an island. I don't know, I can't remember the exact quote, but it's important that as we're marching on with this journey of life, that we incorporate people who may have more experiences than we do, to give us a different perspective that we may not have otherwise been able to obtain. And I certainly have incorporated those folks into my life as early as my early 20s, just because I knew that it would only add more richness into my life. And I know that by expanding and opening up and expanding my mind, and it would give me the opportunity to really learn from others rather than do it myself and, let's say, make a mistake and fail, and having to go through those experiences they have already shared with you. Like I'm skipping a step. And so some people, though, they we're all very different, and some people learn it by the direct failure. They want to have that direct experience. I could tell them to the blue in the face, but until they've actually gone through the experience, they would know. And so, to your point earlier about failure, I mean, it is within failure that lies the greatest opportunity for us to learn, and learn about who we are, what we did wrong, and take that experience and make it better next time around. And so I'm beginning to see, at least from my perspective, more and more leaders are beginning to speak about it. And it's not considered like a trending concept, but it is within the realm of leadership. And so thank you for mentioning that. I know we're about that time. Do you have any last words or advice you'd like to give my listeners on the show? And then also, if you could tell us where we can find you, should we want to connect.
Sure. I get asked a lot by people leaving the military about their what their options might be as they move into corporate. And I typically start with a question about how long do you think you want to work? And so when you ask somebody in their 40s, how long do they think they want to work? They'll almost always tell you 65, because they've been told that 65 is retirement age, and that's when the good life kicks in. I think that's a fundamentally flawed concept. It was, I I think it was sold to us by our parents and our parents' parents, and for a few decades, it might have looked to be the way of the world. Social Security was established with the idea that people would live to a certain length of time. We're now living longer. We have the ability to do work in different ways. My work as an entrepreneur is such that I support a lot of companies and I work every day, but the pace of work and the way in which I work is completely my decision. And I know that the manner in which I work now has added years to my life. That I will live longer. I will probably work longer because I enjoy some level of work. I've seen others who are older than me who are fully retired, and you can only play so much golf in a week. So I believe we should all be challenging what do those later years, what will they look like for us? As I say that, my overarching lesson learned in my corporate life is not to assume that your situation will last forever. I've had multiple professional colleagues and very close friends who have departed this earth much sooner or in much different circumstances than they ever envisioned. And I think if you accept that, if you truly accept that you don't know how much time you have to live, you can allow yourself to live a fuller life. You can take a little more risk. You can enjoy some things now rather than deferring them until very late in life when you may not be physically able to enjoy things. So I like to talk about this concept of how long you want to work, how long do you think you'll be able to work, and how might you adjust some of your choices based on what some of those numbers are. People can find me at in a couple of different ways. My website, genemoran.com, talks all about my business and the books that I've written. I'm active on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to interact with anybody who wants to ask me a specific question or talk about professional experiences. If I can share some learning point, I'm happy to have a short conversation about it.
Gene, thank you so much. I think you've added such an immense gift into this podcast through your lived experiences and sharing them with us, and also your thoughts about purpose and fulfillment. And thank you for reminding us that life is short, and we need to go for our dreams and really do things that we should enjoy now rather than having to wait, because nothing is promised to us. And so I appreciate that conversation. And folks, if you find this episode to be helpful, please reach out to Gene and let us know where you discovered him, which is from the Purpose Tune podcast. And until then, take care.